This video is sponsored by Professional Photographers of America. All right, what's going on, guys? Dan Watson, and check this out. So this is the MacBook Pro 16 Max. I also got the Pro in initially, but ended up settling on the Max. I have to be honest with you guys, I have used and will use basically any computer that gets the job done for me. So I don't care if it's a PC, a Mac, if I build it myself. And because I don't like to be roped into a single system, that also means that I don't use Final Cut and I don't carry around an iPhone. And I've also built more than 3 custom PCs in the last year, so kind of preface all of what I say with that. So for me, it's really about just finding the best computer for the job that I need to do. However, this time, I think I finally found the answer to the best computer for photographers and videographers, and that is the new MacBook Pro M1. Either the Pro version or the Max are both great. Now, a word of caution, Intel's latest 11th generation CPUs have started making its way into some really solid computers. I do have a few options coming in for some more direct comparison, so there are some decent PC options coming onto the market. But even if those initial reviews pan out and the speeds and efficiency really have improved quite a bit, I still think this MacBook Pro is checking quite a bit off my list. What I want to talk about is the actual impressions of using this for a month. And first of all, this laptop does feel thicker and heavier. And that's even coming from my wife, who uses the last generation MacBook Pro. She swears by Apple in this. You won't get her to use anything else.
But look how much thicker, and it's heavier,
yeah,
right?
It feels.
Okay, also, no touch bar. Who likes the touch bar? This girl.
Nope. And so initially this was a bit of a turn off. Now it turns out that this is a little bit more of an optical illusion, but optical illusions matter, especially in the real world. So yeah, spec wise, this is slightly heavier and a little bit thicker than before, but almost unnoticeable. What you do notice is that the last generation actually tapered off really thin to an edge, and so that made it look a lot thinner. This one, the thickness basically goes all the way to the edge. Now, the other big hardware changes were that you now have a notch to allow the display to really come to the edges of the laptop itself. And you have now lost the touch bar, which I'm okay with because I never lose that thing. However, my wife absolutely loves it. So maybe you do too. Either way, I will say that losing it makes the computer look like an older computer. And again, it just kind of felt like a downgrade. So especially when there isn't any new features like a touchscreen to make up for it. But the perception after looking at this computer compared to the old one is that it looks like it has gone back in terms of style, features, and evolution. So instead of feeling like the next generation of laptops, this kind of feels like it should be a last gen. So the last big hardware change we have on this is going to be with ports. And while I do think that Apple got rid of USB-A too early, way too early, a couple years too early, now basically everything I use has USB-C, and so I don't feel like I'm running for an adapter anymore to be able to use USB-A, and knowing that every port on here is Thunderbolt 3 high speed and can be used to charge is really a nice feature. Now there is actually one less Thunderbolt port than before, but we're kind of making up for that because Apple has now included a dedicated charging port, which is MagSafe. So now if you're someone like me and have a bunch of kids around, this will probably save your laptop. If you hit that power cable, it'll just disconnect for you, no worries. But we also have an HDMI port and a card reader, an SD card reader. So in real world use, I was absolutely using one of those ports for one of those things. And so missing that 4th Thunderbolt port is no longer an issue for me. I am much happier to gain these additional ports. And I really feel like having the dedicated power port, but also being able to charge via USB-C just a little bit slower is really the ultimate way to go for any laptop. So before we get into raw performance though, one of the main reasons I wanted a new laptop was because I have some really cool travel coming up. And one of the trips is actually going to be to Imaging USA, January 16th through the 18th, which if you've never been is a really awesome photography event. Tons of speakers there, including some personal friends of mine. So shout out to Miguel, who I see is also going to be teaching there. And this is not just cutting edge photography courses, but also things on business, on software, on tutorials. And there will be a full trade show so you can see the latest products on the market, networking with others. It's going to be really, really awesome. It will be in National Harbor, just outside of Washington, D.C. I'll be hanging out at the show. I'll be there for a few days. So if you're going already, definitely hit me up. If you're not yet, there are actually 2 ways to register. The first is you can just join PPA and go for free with your first year of membership, or registration is just $99 and you can check out the link below. So let's talk about performance, because this is the other big change to this computer, and it's not just performance, it's also performance relative to the energy used. And here's what I mean by that. So performance on this, it's awesome. There are 2 reasons why it's awesome. One is that this new chip just has really good speeds compared to what we had a few years ago on the last generation. But the other thing is that this new chip just supports more video codecs. And so if you're a video editor, this thing will just play through 8K footage from the Sony A1 and R5 natively, even in Premiere, which is probably the worst software around, and I still use it for some reason, but it is probably the slowest software around, even compared to my 16-core desktop Mac Pro, which uses an older Intel chip. Basically, it's like the difference between an F250 and a Tesla Model S. So the F250 might have this giant engine, which if you're towing this very specific load, it might have the power in just the area that you need it. However, if you're looking for performance and speed, the Tesla with a much smaller motor can do 0 to 60 faster than a Ferrari. So I think that's where we really start to see this difference. Now, export speeds are another thing completely, because exporting is largely GPU based. But now with the new M1 Pro and M1 Max chips, things were going so crazy fast that projects on my old computer that were taking like an hour to export were now done in 15 minutes, even with a fair amount of effects on them. But probably this isn't like a massive improvement compared to like high-end gaming laptops with the newest GPUs or higher-end desktops. What is the massive improvement is at no time in these exports did the laptop get hot. Not even just hot, like this thing barely gets warm. And the fans on this just rarely spin. They are barely audible, even with full exports going on. And I found that I could actually export from battery power alone without any big performance hits, which is not typical. So with most other laptops, if you were using something that demanded those GPU heavy applications, you would need plugging in, you would hear the fans, the computers would get hot as crap. Even the old MacBook Pros were really bad on this one. Loud fans, heat issues like crazy. The person like me who is exporting at 2 in the morning in my bed, this was a major issue to me. And I will say that the CPU does heat up a bit more than I felt comfortable with during these exports. So I kind of wonder if Apple should be turning on the fan a little bit earlier and maybe a little bit more, but I'll assume they know what they're doing. But this computer was able to export crazy projects on battery with little to no heat and little to no sound. Plus the battery life on this is just insane. Definitely a big step up from before and compared to a lot of other laptops. I have been editing 4K video for like 3 hours and I'm at 77% battery. And it is just scrubbing through 4K 120 footage like it's nothing. And what is really going on is that this computer is just sipping power compared to a whole lot more. And this is really thanks to that M1 Pro and the M1 Max chips. Actually, any of these M1 chips are really doing that. So even with massive editing on here, the fan is almost never on. So I do want to get into the different configurations, what you should be getting, what I got myself, and also some of the accessories and tools that I'm using to really kind of maximize this for editing. So definitely get at least 1 terabyte and 2 terabytes if you can afford it, but 1 terabyte should be the minimum that you're looking at on this one. And definitely get at least 32 gigs of RAM. Now I tend to hover in the 20s, so 32 gigs will work. If you can afford it though, 64 is going to give you some wiggle room, especially if you use Chrome or Premiere, which are memory hogs on this one. So the other decisions that you have to make are going to be whether or not to go with the Pro or the M1 Max. The biggest differences between these is really just going to be related to the GPU. So if you're shooting photos, I'd probably stick with the M1 Pro. If you're heavy into video with effects and longer exports, maybe you're doing 2-hour, 4-hour projects, I will say the M1 Max is probably going to give you better performance when the exports, and you're going to do those in less time. Not really for standard playback, but definitely on the exporting side is what I have been noticing. Now, I do have a couple of tools that I use pretty often with this laptop. So the first is actually going to be my hubs, and I still use these like crazy. So I have 2 hubs by Anker. The one that I use the most while traveling, this one stays in my backpack, is going to be this one. It is really fast, 10 gigabits per second on here. I'll include links to these below if you want to check them out. It does give me USB-A ports in case you need them. You do have an SD card reader. You don't need that anymore with this computer. However, I need it with my last computer, but you do have a micro SD card reader, which is nice. You also have 2 USB-C ports, one for power and the other one for any kind of data, and another HDMI port. So now you have another port to be able to use for dual monitors if you do want to do that. Both of them also have Ethernet, and Ethernet is really important to me. I'll tell you why in a second, but really cool. This one I use a little bit more at home because it does have a headphone out, so I use this to plug into my speakers at home. It also has, a display port. And so now I have another option of going to an external monitor. The second is going to be hard drives. So both of these are SSDs, and that is going to be the fastest and best way to go with these. I had been using the Crucial X6 and X8. This is the X8. The X6 is a little bit smaller. The X6 is really good for like photo applications. If you're doing video, sometimes you want something a little bit faster. So recently I have switched to these SanDisk G drives, and this is actually really rugged. I've been liking it a lot. It doesn't overheat as much, so I'm more consistent in those 1000 megabyte per second speeds. This is also crazy rugged. IP67, rated to a 10-foot drop, 2,000 pounds of crushing force. So I'll try not to hit this with my car, but this is probably the only thing that has a chance of surviving some pretty big disasters right here. So this has been my go-to now. It's also incredibly small, even smaller than the X8 on here, a little bit thicker, but not a big deal. So this has been my new go-to. Again, I'm gonna link these below, and these drives are amazing. Now for backup, and you always need to have a backup option, I've been using Synology NAS drives for like 5 years. They're the best thing that have ever happened to me. I don't carry around physical hard drives for backup anymore. And so basically via internet, I am actually real time still backing up my computer to those Synology NAS drives. And if I need a file from those computers, no matter where I am in the world, I can access all of them. So they're insane. Now, I did just update this is crazy right here. So I do have about a 5-bay backup system. I think it's a 1018. I'll link to it. I'll show you what it is below. But basically, this is a 5-drive system, and I've got it loaded with about 50 terabytes. And that has been my go-to now. I just upgraded to this right here. And this is going to house 120 terabytes into this server that is going to sit in my office. And this is going to hold everything on it. It is going to back up everything real time. And then the nicest thing is that I'm going to use that other system offsite. So now I have files from this that I can back up to that other system that's offsite and never have to worry about it. So wirelessly over the internet, I have 3-stage backup solutions, or anything that I have wired in here is going to back up even at higher speeds. And every computer I own is real-time backed up to this. It has redundancy built in, really high speed. So yeah, this system is just crazy awesome. So now, because I'm getting so much power in a really efficient computer, I am someone who doesn't use an iPhone and doesn't use Final Cut, and I am now loving this MacBook Pro. I'm still going to maintain that this computer feels like a step backwards in a few areas. It feels thicker. It feels less 21st century modern, especially because they got rid of the touch bar, no touch screen still, and now you have a notch in the display. Even so much so that I bought my wife one of these computers, and she did not like it so much I ended up having to return it because she loves that touch bar and thought it felt thicker and heavier and she just didn't like it. So she is going back to her older MacBook Pro. And so yeah, this feels like it's going back a few generations ago. However, it's going to a better place. It's going to where computers should have been, where we're getting the power we need to edit our stuff, and we're not doing it with scorching temperatures and massive fan speeds and everything else. We have a power cable that looks and weighs a little bit less like an actual brick and more like an actual charger from a phone. And we have now the Thunderbolt 3 ports that actually work with the things that we have. I have an SD card reader, I have an HDMI port. I will be talking a little bit more about my entire desk setup, workflow for using a laptop and everything like that, accessories, backup solutions, and basically best tools for running this on the go or as a desktop setup. And so definitely wait and check that out. Hope you guys are having fun. Ask me some questions if you have any below, and definitely stay tuned. Look for me at Imaging USA. I will be there. Hope you guys are doing amazing, and I'll see you soon in a new video.